You know, it may seem kind of odd to start a video after you came up from a rainy day and just spontaneously tend to get an idea. But hey, why not? So what's up going? So my name is Cons, which you probably already have heard by the name of the channel. And what I want to talk about in this video is the idea of freedom. What do we really mean by it? And in the most common sense, if we come to talk about freedom, freedom is actually the possibility to do what you want, whenever you want, and how you want it to do. So to put it short, it's essentially about desire, and more particularly about pursuing our very desires. But instead of saying that we want to pursue something and talk particularly about the desire, freedom is more nuanced than that in this sense. It's more about the freedom of control, the freedom of controlled possibility. We don't want to be other people's desires in this sense, that they want to control us or to be a part in their life that they find function in that we don't want. In fact, it's not so much about the freedom of control by other people, but whether the control of other people tends to satisfy us. But especially when we come to talk about power, in this sense, control over other people, it's no more in this sense about this physical control, where if you don't do something you get physically punished. Instead, if we would give it a more Foucaultian perspective, power is about limiting the possibilities in which we tend to perceive. So let's say the school has power over you to force you to go to school. Now the power is not in this sense that it will physically punish you for not going to school. It's more like the power that you don't perceive it as a possibility to not go to school because it seems so inevitable and desirable. But what about this kind of power that we tend to resist? What makes it so resistible? And still we tend to do it by still feeling oppressed about it. Now, power in of itself is inevitable. Even when you say we want other people to stop controlling us, or freedom, what it does, it gives us the possibility to control ourselves. We are still under the influence of control. The question is about what control are we talking about? And what I recently discovered is that one of the most beautiful ways to explain how freedom tends to work, in the sense we talk about it, is actually from Lacan's idea of the object PTR. And let me show you what it is. Now when we talk about object PTR, it's essentially the reason why you tend to desire the things that you desire. It's the cause of everything of your desire. In other words, object PTR is what your life tends to revolve around most of the time. It's one of those desires that aren't suppressed and that we allow ourselves to pursue actively in order to fulfill us. Now, the way we experience desire is essentially through lack. It's through the inherent belief that there is something lacking within our life, that we need something to satisfy and to fulfill in order to be happy. But besides the experience of lack, what's underlying towards lack is in fact the experience of loss. In fact, loss is the reason why we experience lack. Loss is the reason why we tend to experience desire. Now, for loss to happen, the child, or in this sense, the person, has to undergo what Lacan calls castration. Now, I'm not talking about a physical castration, but I'm talking about a symbolic castration, where we're going to talk about the oedipus complex. To give a quick review, the oedipus complex is essentially the desire for the mother, which gets prevented through the father. Now, the goal of the child is to be the most desirable for the mother as possible. But what the mother perceives, or in this sense the primary caregiver, is that it sees that the father, or the phallus, is more desirable than the child. And so for the child to figure out to be more loved, it tries to figure out what the father has, what quality he possesses that make him more desirable than the child. Note that we are talking in the symbolic sense, and that what we usually talk about when you talk about a phallus is about this symbolic value, what we think makes the father more desirable than ourselves. But besides this being the classical explanation of the oedipus complex, Lacan introduces a fourth part to this triangle, and it is the paternal function. Now, to the previous triangle that we presented at the beginning, What the paternal function does is it tells the child that you can't be the fatherless, or in other words, you cannot be as desirable as your father. In this form of prohibition, of not allowing the child to become like the father, is in fact called castration. And castration, in this sense, is the cause of loss. It is the very first form of prohibition that's from where desire tends to originate from, or at least object cause of desire. This is where the child becomes the split subject. It either accepts the prohibition, the no of the father, or it tends to resist, which would further on develop into psychosis, at least according to Lacan. But between the split within the subject, there are even two significant roles within psychoanalysis. And the first one is the big other, and the second one is the subject himself. Now the big other is represented by two parts within this triangle. Essentially, the big other is the primary caregiver. It's the thing that we tend to act so performative, so pretentious, in order to prove our desire. It's according to whom our desire tends to orient. But another experience of this being watched comes also from the paternal function, which is the prohibition. And what it does is the following. Now let's say this is your mind, and this is all the desires that it currently tends to want. But some desires are prohibited. The big other doesn't allow some certain desires. And so after the castration, in this sense, there will be some desires that are permittable, some things that are good to want, like for example to study or exercise, and some desires are bad. The desires that we inherit as good or permittable to experience is referred as object PTR. It is so essentially the core desire around that all desires tend to revolve. In fact, our entire life tends to revolve around object PTR. It's the reason why we tend to do everything that we do in life. But what happens if somebody would want to take away this desire, or object cause of desire? What would we experience if somebody would want to take away this object cause of our desire? And this is anxiety. Anxiety is what we experience when the big other, in this sense, tends to desire our own lack. It's the moment when we have all these desires met to be desirable. So for the paternal caregiver, the only thing that's left desirable is to fill their lack. We no longer see this big other as this person that knows everything, like a parent from whom we could see advice. We realize from this fantasy that the paternal caregiver, or the parent, doesn't know so much about life as we thought they did. And in fact, they're lacking us. They need our insecurity, they need our fear in order to fill themselves. Now for the child, this is completely catastrophic. Because now the child cannot pursue its own desire because it has to give away its object cause of desire towards the parent. In other words, for the child to feel desired is to give away its own desire, because every time it would decide to pursue its own desire and to do the things that it wants, it would experience anxiety, it would experience again this loss of the separation from the parent. This is, for example, what a lot of children tend to struggle with when they're left alone from their parent. Now, to some extent it's normal when a child first experiences being alone from their parent, let's say by going to school or to kindergarten. Yeah, they may have difficulty separating from the parent. But to some extent, the child finds it so inevitable to be a part of the parent's life that considering being apart from the parent is provoking anxiety. This is what makes it also so difficult to deal with anxiety. Sure, you could say, well, just avoid the parent and just get away from the parent and then your anxiety would go away. Well, it's not so simple as that. Because of this fear of separation towards the abuser, the child or the person that's being abused will find himself in an uncomfortable pendulum. On the one hand, they fear to separate themselves from the abuser, even though wanting it. On the other hand, they want to separate themselves but wouldn't bear the loss of getting away from this abusive parent. In fact, this is one of the reasons why overcoming the separation anxiety early in childhood tends to help the person out of dealing with anxiety in the long run. The purpose, which Lacan says, is to enable the child to form their own healthy form of desire. So they're not afraid of pursuing what they desire and what they want to desire. Now, in his 10th seminar, Lacan tends to get really in-depth around this. And so I'm going to present to you a formula which would more or less sum up the experience of anxiety the way Lacan tends to explain it. But note this book is rather thick, or more or less. And even though I wouldn't discuss everything which Lacan will talk about anxiety, I will present to you a formula towards helping you to understand what Lacan means by anxiety. Now, this is essentially the formula. Now, it may look a bit complex at first, but essentially, as long as you understand what each symbol means, it won't be that difficult to understand. Now, D on both sides are referring towards desire. It's what the one person may want and what the other person may want. R is the big other. It's the overarching part that we desire to find approval in. Essentially the paternal caregiver. And the split subject is ourselves, or the patient in this sense. Now, I forgot this line, whatever. The split subject is represented by this cross cutting through it. And essentially this split represents the lack of the person. Now this I in the middle is the object cause of desire. It's a little a towards that or lives into resolve. Now for us as a subject, I will mark it out here. We have an object cause of desire that we are pursuing. And this object cause of desire creates desire. Now, this desire, in order to make sense, be projected towards the world. Let's say it be some kind of goal that we want to achieve. And we will pursue X, whatever it means for us to satisfy ourselves. Now, the joy of desire is found within desire itself. It's the joy of pursuing and finding meaning within our lives rather than the material quality of the goal. But what if the paternal caregiver would go around and say, you know what, I want your object cause of desire. And in order to be desired by the big other, around that our lives into resolve, we would have to give away our object PDR in order to feel safe, in order to feel good. Now, for Lacan, developing a healthy form of desire is actually how you deal with anxiety. If you have uncertainty, the way to overcome this anxiety is to create, again, certainty of knowing, okay, what am I going to do? What will save me or what will make me experience safety? By knowing a solution on how you can deal with the distress is half the battle how you resolve this anxiety. Anxiety is finding a way so you can, again, actively pursue and overcome this experience of fullness. So you have a lack that will more or less satisfy you within your life. Now, knowing this, you can understand why people tend to want freedom. Freedom is the protection of the object cause of the desire. Now, this sounds fair and good, but what do you do when you have anxiety? And the three things that you want to figure out in this sense is, okay, what is your desire that you're afraid of losing? What is the anxiety and what is it causing you to think that you're losing? And what is essentially your object cause of your desire? Now, it's different from individual towards individual, but by studying the symbolic value and by recollecting everything that you tend to be afraid of, you can get into a deeper sense of understanding of it. Now, I just want to warn you, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I just studied Lacan and I'm just retelling what he taught me in his book. So essentially I'm summarizing his 10th seminar. But I hope this will help you understand a little bit more about anxiety and freedom, and yeah, tell me what you think about it. As always, I appreciate you watching, and perhaps we see each other in another video.